Welcome. This is Adam with Progressive Voice. I have an incredible guest tonight, a young man who I met in 2016 on the Bernie Trail. The it was a grueling ordeal for those of us who can recall 2016, and this gentleman. Just a little bit of background. So, you meet a lot of people along the way in the political revolution. You meet people during the campaigns. You meet people tangential to the campaigns. You meet campaign staffers. One of the people that I met is this young man, Gabriel MacArthur, and he worked tirelessly during 2016. He worked with the campaign. He worked with activism. He just worked. I mean, it's that simple. He just worked and worked and worked, and we were part of a group of people who were running the Slack channel that was putting all of our delegates together when we were going to the national convention, and he was one of our owner managers on the Slack channel. And then we finally were able to meet in person along with many other people when we got to Philadelphia. And he has done some just absolutely incredible things since then. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But more than that, he's a very wise beyond his years individual with regard to the politics and the Bernie fight. And I can't think of a better person to have on our broadcast to do a recap. We'll just do a recap of the debate from Sunday night. It seems like forever, but it was last night. And, we'll chat. That's kind of what we do here. We're hoping to engage, educate, and empower your progressive voice as we move forward. And on top of that, we're all kind of self-quarantining right now, and it's good to have that sort of voice in the darkness to make us remember and be aware that we're not alone at all. Again, of course, as always, we are going live right now on YouTube, so like, subscribe, ring that bell so you're notified when we have new content to share with you. That helps us grow. That makes sure that when you look for Progressive Voice in your search, you find us and not other people. So that's a good plus. And on top of that, it lets us know what you think about what we're doing. Of course, as always, on a live stream, you can comment. So if you go ahead and throw a comment in there, we can respond to you. We can throw that comment up on the screen, and you can be a part of what we're doing here. So without further ado, I am going to bring in, and he's muted right now. I'm going to fix that. Gabriel MacArthur. How you doing, Gabriel?
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for having me.
It's going well. It's going well. All right. So what did you think about the debates?
I think it went pretty well for Bernie. One of the prevailing storylines I saw with people was, Biden didn't have a severe cognitive mishap this debate, so that means he did fantastically. And that's just not how I saw it, but I guess we can get into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, how did you see it? we got all the time in the world, so...
Well, I'm one of the people who this whole time has been hoping that Bernie Sanders would be aggressive, especially when we all remember 2008, how aggressive things got between President Obama and Secretary Clinton. So any time that these Bernie bro attacks have been brought up against him in a debate, I think it should just be as simple as go back to the YouTube and watch those debates. And then squash it just like that. This is a primary. That's what this is about. We're distinguishing each other on our records. We're not attacking him on a personal level. So anything's fair game. I think that this whole time Bernie should have had that approach. I think he shouldn't have been so ready to apologize for every little thing they try to use against him. But I think that for the first time in these debates, Bernie Sanders really challenged Joe Biden in an honest and direct way. And I saw some people say that he could have pushed him further, and an argument could be made for that, I guess. But I think that this is the Bernie that we've been waiting to see up against Joe Biden this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Looking at some of the commentary that we had about this, I'm looking at my notes here real quick. Looking at some of that commentary, people were saying that, Bernie sort of seemed like he was sleepwalking through the first half hour or so. And I don't know how I thought about that. I mean, I watched what he said, and it seemed very much to me like he was laying out trying to be calm, because they're always, it's such a fine line with him, because they're always talking about, oh, angry Bernie, and yet, when he doesn't give us angry Bernie, when he gives us sort of thoughtful, compassionate Bernie, then they accuse him of having less energy. And to me, what we had during the first part of it was thoughtful, compassionate Bernie, basically saying, these are the things that we need to do. We need to take care of our people. And it seemed like Biden was, I wrote down something that I think might have actually been apt here. So it seemed for me like Biden is kind of driving behind Bernie. He can't seem to get ahead of him ideologically. And so it's like you're driving behind another person in this car, and you're getting angry about having to be on the road.
Right.
And it really seemed to me that's kind of what was going on is we it's like I was waiting for him to just sort of stand on his podium and say, yeah, what he said, only angrier. And that's very much how it felt to me, because, there was another comment that he made sort of early on there, where Bernie was trying to give the distinction that that Medicare for all, if we had Medicare for all, if we had universal health care, a lot of these things would not even be an issue right now. We wouldn't be in as much of a crisis, because those things would already be taken care of. And so, one of the comments, and this was clearly like a canned response, that we know he was waiting, not as bad as Pete. I mean, Pete was like, Pete reminded me of like the Mad Libs candidate, in the sense that it was, okay, I have talking points, and I'm going to find where I'm going to insert those talking points and the movement that goes along with those talking points. And, last time I had B on, and we sat at the town halls together, and we both had the same response, because like, it was like Pete, you could see his mind calculating as to when the appropriate time to insert platitude would be. We turn the page. And it's like, we turn the page with the motion. Or because it's like someone programmed him that the motion went along. So the platitude that I heard from Biden, that apparently his staffers worked very hard on, Biden said, people want results, not a revolution. And I'm like, that's a canned line. And one of the things that I thought about it as soon as I heard it was, and I was yelling at the screen, as I do. I don't know if you do the same. I watch.
Oh yeah, it's like football. It's like football. Yeah. No, I mean, Bernie, he missed an opportunity at that moment to say, here's the situation. We've got a global pandemic that threatens the lives of millions of people. We have a healthcare system that wasn't prepared to deal with it. We've got a president who's not equipped to handle it. We've got a Congress and a Senate that isn't acting enough, and isn't acting quickly enough, isn't acting forcefully enough, isn't acting bipartisanly enough, right? We have vast income and wealth inequality without a pandemic threatening to drive the economy into the ground. If now is not the moment for a revolution, explain to me what it would take. And that was the huge opportunity that Bernie missed last night, I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm redirecting, and you're absolutely right. And I'm redirecting because I just got a text asking if we're on Facebook. And so I'm responding. to follow the link. Okay, so let's hope that is people being a little confused, thinking we're on Facebook. And for any of you who may catch this later, the reason we're not Facebook Living is because Facebook Living doesn't do anything to help our YouTube presence. It does if you want to go ahead and watch the recap or watch the broadcast later. But if you're watching it live, we can reach more people if we go via Facebook, which is why we did it that way. And I was going to give advice on how to get to us, but that's kind of redundant because if they haven't figured that one out, they're not going to hear my advice anyway. So what you were saying is exactly, Bernie was laying all of that information out. He was laying out that, on all levels of government, we have a failing on all levels of government. And then on top of that, Joe, what is your plan? And Joe was like, well, my plan is essentially your plan, but without Medicare for all.
But I can get it done.
I can get it done, exactly.
I get stuff done. Number one, I get stuff done. Number two, as a matter of fact, I get stuff done.
Yeah, but what the stuff is kind of up for debate as to whether or not people want the stuff that you want to get done. So, my response to that, when I heard that, I'm like, give him the good line, Bernie, give him the good line. And to me, when he said people want results, not a revolution, what I wanted to say is, yeah, but sometimes it requires a revolution in order to get those results.
Yeah, that would have been a perfect answer.
And that's kind of where we are. I have a lot of confidence in Bernie's team way up above. But sometimes I'm like, come on, guys, better writing staff. And
you know what I think it is? Because I'm watching his upper staff, and to me it seems like they want the same things that you and I are talking about. They want him to forcefully make the case against Joe Biden, or at least that's what I want. I don't want to speak for you, but he's not doing it, and I think that's what we're watching happen. David Sirota, Brianna Joy Gray, Senator Nina Turner, all of these people talk forcefully about Joe Biden. And whenever Bernie Sanders is directly challenged on it, hey, Nina Turner said this about Joe. Hey, David Sirota said this about Joe. And Bernie Sanders' response this whole time has been, well, that's not what I'm about. It's like, well, really, that's what you are about. That's what your whole candidacy is about. You wouldn't be challenging him if you thought he was gravy.
Right. You wouldn't. And, it's confusing because we keep wondering, why are you not fighting? Why are you not fighting? I thought there was more fight in this debate.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, he brought it out last night, and I think that it's he's been attacking throughout the day too. Not attacking, but challenging Joe on his record. So hopefully that dam is broken now. Right.
So it's my intent that as things move forward. Okay, see, I just tested this. For any of you who are watching, I'm sorry, Gabriel, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we're a little bit new here. I just tested by posting a comment from my other YouTube channel to this one, and was able to find out that yes. So if you're seeing this "Hi Mom" on the screen, that's me saying "Hi Mom," and so I know that the comment section does work. So, folks, please, send us a comment, send a comment our way, so that we know you're out there. But yeah, you're saying, he brought the fight. I'm going to go back to my notes here for a second, if I can read my own handwriting, which is sometimes a difficult prospect. So the first thing Biden did was cough a lot. Yeah. And normally, I don't want to get on how somebody, sort of presents themselves. But that was scary. I just today, in the current state of things, to when he starts and he just comes out and he starts coughing, I'm like going,
The first question.
Yeah,
The first question
thing,
about coronavirus.
yeah, exactly. The first thing
Let me
about
tell
the
you.
crisis, cough, cough, and I was like, oh my god! And in a different world, I guess maybe in a TV politics world, is a better way to put it. That would be the end of his campaign right there.
Yeah.
You can
Well,
see it. You can just see it where, there it goes. The cough heard around the world. But of course, and if it was Bernie,
yeah.
that corporate media, MSNBC CNN would broadcast the cough heard around the world,
Right.
right?
Well, what's funny is I saw that argument made in reverse against Bernie from somebody in the mainstream media that because there was a moment where Bernie kept referring to COVID-19 as Ebola.
Right. Of course, that was after
Biden had referred to it as like three different things.
Right.
The African thing. Well, I think he was referring to Ebola in that moment, but he forgot it was called Ebola. Anyway, that's what I'm saying. They're like, well, if Biden had called it Ebola, which he did, then everybody would be talking about cognitive decline.
But see, and
so they were trying to use that argument against Bernie.
Right. And then what I thought was funny is I kept thinking, because anytime, people misspeak. People misspeak on the campaign trail. They misspeak during speeches. And, old school mode of thought is you never apologize. You just keep moving forward. So, yeah, I remember I was at any number of Bernie events in Nevada. And I remember one event where he talked about, I think he talked about the Iowa caucus. He meant the Nevada caucus. But right. he's in so many different places, or was now everything's being done digitally. But his campaign schedule was so insane and so grueling that one should be forgiven for misspeaking. And I kept saying, why doesn't he just say, gosh, this campaign trail, I have been to X number of states. I know I'm in Nevada, like he's at a rock concert. Thank you, Nevada. I don't know. And that could have been a moment to really kind of bring the crowd in. And, I think it would have been. But Bernie did correct himself last night. He was going, he's going Ebola. And then he said, wait a minute. Ebola, you've been saying Ebola so much. I've got Ebola on the brain. Which that
was brilliant.
Yes, and had there been an audience, that would have gone over beautifully.
Oh yeah.
And there wouldn't have been an opportunity for MSNBC or CNN or whichever network made a thing about him misspeaking, wouldn't have been able to do that because the audience reaction would have negated that. But yeah, the first thing Biden does is cough, and that was. I was frightened, and I don't have the innate distaste for Joe Biden as a human being that I did for Hillary. But this is not a Joe Biden that I think is equipped to either take on Trump or be president, and I don't agree with most of his policies. But as a person, I didn't have an issue with him. So right. I'm like, I was worried when he started coughing. Again, Biden says little except visit the website, and my time is up. I mean, that seemed to be the majority of what he said.
I think I counted 3 times, I think, where he stopped himself, or was like, hey, are you going to stop me over there?
Yeah, and it's like, are you going to take the opportunity to speak to the people? Or, yeah, it was, there were points where he just stood there. His time was up, and he just waited for them to come in. I mean, there were a couple of times when, yes, Bernie waited for the go-ahead to start talking. But yeah, go to the website, and I think my time's up. So that was it. Bernie just lays it out, man. This is kind of like at the beginning of the debate, as you see, I'm going off my notes. He just lays it out. He just lays out. These are the things we need to do. And am I mistaken? I don't know if you had the same response. I don't know if I'm mistaken here, but it seemed to me that Bernie was the only one there on the stage last night who was actually talking about the tangential impacts of this crisis.
People in jail, people that are homeless. The only substantive argument during that first coronavirus section of the debate that to me came from Joe Biden was, we need more tests. Tests should be free. We need more tests. You got to get tested. And he didn't, at least I don't remember him at first saying anything about treatment. And he certainly didn't mention people in jail. He certainly didn't mention homeless people. Talk nothing about people who are going to be out of work. So,
yeah, I mean, Bernie kept using the term, if you, I don't even know if my Bernie imitation is any good, but I have a hard time not trying to do a Bernie voice when I say what he said. But he was saying, if you are impacted by this, if you're sick, if you're concerned about being sick, if you have to take off work, we need to make sure that our people are made whole. And, our people being made whole that's such a strange turn of phrase to me. I know it's a common turn of phrase. It's just strange to me. But he was talking about, what if you're a family member and you're stressed out? He's the only one who talked about mental health care with regard to this. People who, this is a cause of anxiety. People are stressed out, mental health issues. And are they going to get treatment? Can they get mental health care due to this Ebola? This Ebola. I just said Ebola. Wow. Due to this outbreak.
Thank you, Joe Biden.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Joe Biden. We get, for some reason, apparently, if you say the C word, I've heard that you get a YouTube strike. I don't know. I haven't gotten a YouTube strike yet. But, the crisis. Let's just say the crisis, and we all know what we're talking about. But people whose mental health is impacted by the crisis. And what he was trying to lay out there, and I think Joe missed it, or at least he didn't respond to it, was with Medicare for all, with a single payer plan, with all of this stuff, that if we had that, we wouldn't have to worry about a number of these tangential factors. We wouldn't have to worry about whether people can get treatment due to how this will impact people's mental health. We wouldn't have to deal with can they get tested. We wouldn't have to deal with can they get treated. The health aspect of all of this would already be covered. So the only thing that we would have to deal with is the economic aspect of this. And I really kind of he laid it out very clearly, but he didn't lay it out very succinctly. Because I think that's really the succinct way to lay it out. If we had Medicare for all, if we had a Medicare for all single payer program, the only aspects of this crisis that would still be a crisis are the economic ones. We wouldn't be in a health care crisis around this.
And why, well, this is not the only reason why, but obviously it's the straw that broke the camel's back. Why is the economy crashing right now? Because the medical side of it wasn't covered.
Right.
Because the uncertainty that brings is making the whole economic market lose their crap.
I hope Disney doesn't kill me out of my, because I haven't copyrighted Grumpy. Y'all, I don't own the copyright on Grumpy. That belongs to the Walt Disney Corp, so don't hit my video YouTube. You're right. You're absolutely right. The economic aspect of this crisis is either the result or severely impacted by the healthcare crisis of this impact. But it didn't get laid out, and that's what's in my notes. It didn't get laid out about how we are in this massive crisis, which would have been, we'd only kind of be dealing with half of the practical aspect of this crisis if we had a universal health care, a Medicare for all single payer plan, that we wouldn't have to worry about. Again, can you see a doctor? Can you get tested? How are we going to pay for treatment? Do people not get tested because they don't think they can pay for treatment? We'd still be dealing with the aspect of, getting the homeless population or the home challenged population into actually get medical care, because that is a huge part of this. And Bernie tried, I have a note, Bernie tried to illustrate that our lack of conscience in the way that our country runs is a vast contributor to what would otherwise already be a significant crisis. But, we've got 500,000 people living on the street. That's 500,000 potential carriers of the disease who we are not providing for. We're not taking care of our homeless. We're not taking care of our hungry. Even if people get treatment, if they don't have the proper conditions under which that treatment can be successful, how is that going to work out? I mean, what is about follow-up care? It's a massive, massive crisis. But Joe's answer seemed to be more and more. Biden is more and more about bring in the troops. Bring in the troops. But comparison to Ebola is a false equivalency anyway.
Right.
And not a template for how to deal with this current situation. This is going to be uncontrollably, I was going to use a really bad syntax. This is so much more of a pandemic. I mean, Ebola was bad, but it didn't really impact us in the United States. This is already.
It's hard to pass on. It's hard to get Ebola. I mean, it's transmissible, obviously, but it's a lot harder to pass on than this thing is.
Yeah, I mean, and this is impactful on so much more epic of a scale. That equivalency is false. And one of the things I was chatting with my my elderly roommate, as I am wont to do, and I see that he's a tough guy. He's a Vietnam veteran. And was an addictions counselor, a gambling addictions counselor, and I think overall addictions counselor. I don't know. He doesn't talk a whole lot about his life in the past, but he's kind of a tough guy, kind of a tough it out sort of individual. But I can see that he's scared. I mean, he's in his mid-70s. He never really leaves the house. I mean, he doesn't go anywhere. But I can still see that there's a fear there, and there's a palpable difference in our environment, even in terms of being on the street. I mentioned it in a previous broadcast that I had gone to Sam's, and it had kind of seemed to bring out the worst in people. I had because obviously there were no dry goods at Sam's when I went there. Right. I don't feel like we're in Miami getting ready for a hurricane and all of our services are going to go. So we need to stock up on candles and what have you. But I also am conscious of the fact that I have an elderly roommate, so I don't want to go out and put myself at risk, which in turn will put the people I live with at risk. So I kind of stocked up on some things, but I had a different shopping experience. I was at Sam's last time. This time I was at Costco, and I was at Winco. I don't know if you guys have Winco out there. I prefer to shop at Winco because Winco is employee owned. It's also usually pretty good deals, but it's employee owned, and I like to support that kind of a business model. So when I can shop there, I do. So, shout out to Winco. Yay for being employee owned. But the vibe of the people. Now, when I went to Costco, there were police. There were actual police directing traffic.
I heard about this, yeah.
And there were employees who were directing you through the store. If you were going for this department, you had to go through this route. If you were going to this department, you had to go through that route. If you wanted to check out, they guided you on how to go to get checked out. It was a well-oiled machine, but it was also kind of creepy. And when we were coming in, there were like carnival barkers shouting that limit 1 for eggs, limit 1 for milk, per club member. It was kind of scary. When I went to Winco, everybody was so nice. And it's not just the employees and the other people shopping there. The people at Costco, the shoppers were also. It seemed like everybody was trying to go out of their way to be nice to each other, which was great.
Yeah. Yeah, I had an experience like that too when I went out. It was cool.
Yeah.
Just a little moment of solidarity in all this craziness around us.
Exactly. It was like it was so antithetical to my experience the previous day. But one of the things that came to mind when I was talking to my roommate was we are already having an issue with the militarization of our police forces. So when you're talking about these communities, including communities of color, specifically lower, and I don't mean to imply that communities of color are necessarily on a lower socioeconomic strata. They're not, by and large. The socioeconomic issues that we have in this country do not recognize skin color. They do not recognize race. So in our areas with the lower neighborhoods with a lower socioeconomic population, people are already fearful of the militarization of the police force. In our immigrant populations, they see someone in a uniform who is militarized, they automatically assume it's ICE or someone's getting deported or they're going to take somebody out at gunpoint. We're in a bad way in terms of the way that our undocumented population, but not even only undocumented, our population of color, who seems to be a target no matter whether they do anything or don't. You know, we've got young black men being shot for having a Coke can in their hand. And you want to bring in the troops to try and solve this crisis? That's your answer? Now, I understand the military, even above and beyond the National Guard. And unfortunately, our National Guard is busy overseas trying to bring freedom to other places, quote unquote. But, you know, this is the time when our National Guard would be most able to do what it is that they're supposed to do. And our wonderful servicemen and women in the National Guard who signed up to help our country and are busy being shipped overseas and put on the front lines. But that's an old story. That's not a new story. But the fact is, yes, there are things that the regular military has, resources that are above and beyond what the National Guard can provide. But still, the idea of our streets, the idea of there being camps set up in our communities to treat tens of thousands of people in quote-unquote MASH units, which, hey, as a concept, I get it. As a concept, I absolutely get the idea that, the military can provide a huge relief effort in terms of medical care. I get that. But just the visual in some of our struggling communities and our communities of color and our communities which have a high percentage of the undocumented, it is a very frightening thought to think of a military force coming in to occupy those areas to help with the crisis. Even and it is the right term to say occupy those areas.
Right.
Apologies, camera issue here real quick. We're going to fix that. Okay. It is an actual issue to say occupy those areas, but it does feel, I mean, do you think, Gabriel, do you think it would feel like a military occupation?
Well, I was having this conversation with my sister and her husband. We were talking about it. And I said, right now we're in a situation where we look at Donald Trump as somebody who might abuse the power of the government. But in this moment, we need him to wield the power of the government in order to protect us. And that's a scary position for us to be in because we are depending on this guy right now. And we, and apart from the coronavirus, his issues, along with the issues that created him, the issues that he's caused and the issues that caused him, right now I look at it like the people he's fighting with, it's like Godzilla versus King Kong, and I'm standing on the street, and I'm like, whoa, I don't know who I want to win. I just know I don't want to get stepped on right now.
Sure.
And I think that kind of translates to this situation because obviously we want as many people to be safe as possible. But the idea of, like you said, the police having checkpoints, asking you, where are you going? What are you doing? That's a scary thought. But we also, on the flip side of that, have a situation where you have people going out in crowds thinking it's not a big deal. So what do you do in that situation? Do you restrict people's movements because they can't be trusted to do that themselves? Or do you, like, I think it was South Korea, where they never actually had any restricted movement. They just, as a society, understood, okay, we have to stay home. We have to do the social distancing thing for a little bit, and once it passes, we're good. That's the question right now.
Yeah, and it's
well, and to tie it back to the debates, I think that is one thing that needs to be said in this moment, because I've watched certain pundits, I've watched certain people talk about this election as if this entire crisis around us isn't happening. They talk about it in terms of like the horse race, or they act like it's fantasy football. And right now, they need to understand, from this point on, we don't know what's going to happen. Like you said, this guy that he's been around a while, has seen a few things. He's never seen anything like this.
Sure.
Nobody has.
Yeah, you're right. Nobody has. And I mean, getting back to the debate here, the next note that I had, and this, because I know this is going to take us off in a whole new area here. Was it just me, or did it seem like Biden was advocating trickle-down economics? I mean, he was talking about this stimulus package for the bank. I mean, Bernie really hammered home this idea that, now you're wondering, you talk about how we're going to pay for it. How are we going to pay for that $1.5 trillion that they gave to Wall Street to try and create liquidity, and they said, and all of this. And Biden's answer, the idea that somehow the liquidity of Wall Street was going to trickle down to an economy where people are busy self-quarantining, was shocking me. I'm like, so Biden it sounded to me like Biden was advocating trickle-down economics. Did it strike you that way?
Not only that, absolutely. Not only did he say that, he phrased it in a way that said, if you go after those banks, it's going to hurt people that you say that you care about. Right. That's the way that he framed that argument.
And I think that's the way he said it.
I think that's the way he sees it. I think that he's been around these people for how many decades now? They're his friends. They're his buddies. We all know that he's from Delaware, where it's a big financial industry, area, and on a certain level, that is true, right? On a certain level, we, the little people, do depend on the banks for storing our money if we do that. For getting a home loan, for whatever the case may be, but or we depend on the banks to write our payroll checks, or whatever the case is. On a certain level, yeah, we all get that, but at the same time, nothing says that those particular banks need to be the ones that we depend on.
Sure.
And they're trying to set up a government which ensures that they're always the ones that we depend on, and what he should have said, what Bernie should have said, or at least, I think he tried to make this point, was the bailout needs to be this time for the people. You want to talk about bailing out the banks? We could talk about that once we've got the people taken care of.
Yeah, that's how it struck me as well. And but I was just shocked. I'm like, very often they talk about Biden being the senator from MBNA, and that, to me, that strikes a particular chord. I remember hearing that. I was walking one of my dogs, and they were talking about him. And this was before everyone coalesced behind him. This was when that was seen by the corporate media structure as a liability. and they were actually willing to talk about Biden's past and his record. And it struck me viscerally because, so many people, myself included, I had a period of time when I got very, very ill in my 20s, and it had been MBNA who had booths day after day after day at my college campus trying to get college students to get credit cards. And I was one of those stupid college students who went for an MBNA credit card, and it was like an albatross around my neck for I don't know how long after I had taken ill and wasn't able to work for a while. And it was a nightmare dealing with MBNA. They were a predatory lender, which is why their credit card company is pretty much out of business or renamed itself. And that's the people that had supported this guy. But the idea that he was talking about, he was advocating for trickle-down economics at a Democratic presidential primary debate. Yeah. I'm sorry, Republican talking points are Republican talking points, however you dress them up.
And they're not even new Republican talking points. They're like Reagan Republican talking points.
Well, see, that's a thing, man. That's a thing, because I've said over and over again, and I said it right here on this channel a couple nights ago, because of the way that the Democratic Party has continually tried to pander to to moderate Republicans, and moderate Republicans become less and less moderate. As they move to the right, we move to the right to try and meet them halfway. So they move more to the right. So we move to try and meet them halfway, to the point where, your neoliberal Democrat is indistinguishable from a Reagan Republican.
Right. And I would accept that strategy. I would accept the strategy from the centrists that says, well, we got to move to the center to try to pick off those people that are in that demographic, right? We can't go too far left. I would accept that argument if I ever heard a Republican ever saying to their people, we don't want to go too far right because we want to scare people away. If I heard them saying that same thing, okay, fine, make that argument. But we're not hearing that from them.
Because,
it's like you said, we're letting them drag us along with them to the right.
And you know what? What I find scariest, and maybe this is my tinfoil hat moment, but what I find most frightening about that is that will never happen, because the far right of the Republican Party is based in religious indoctrination. So that will never change. They will continue to use terms that mean exactly the opposite of what they are, like religious liberty, to try and prop up their own ideology until we become, if these folks have their way, and I'm not saying all Republicans, but the far right evangelical Republicans, if they have their way, we will be a theocracy, and we will be no different than any of those demonized cultures that they love to demonize. They don't demonize Islamic extremism just because it's extremism. They seem to have no problem with Judeo-Christian extremism. But that's another show. That's a whole
they
other.
They have a lot more in common.
What'd you say?
And they have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Anyway, for as much as they try to,
crusades much. Just saying.
Yeah. That's so, and that's what frustrates me about people who just earlier today, right? I had somebody tweet at me and say, it's just not time for the revolution. Those are great things. Those are awesome. Making the same argument that they make when all of this isn't happening around us.
Right.
Look, if this was a normal election, if this were, let's just say the circumstances were similar to 2016, you don't have this pandemic, it would be tough for Joe Biden to win already. But I think he could pull it off. In a 2016 circumstantial election,
sure,
I think Joe Biden could maybe pull it off. But we're not looking at that. And to try to pretend that it is in any way that, like the people who say it's over, Bernie needs to drop out. Why did we even have a debate? It's already over. they can't act like the circumstances haven't changed, because they've changed in just about every way possible.
Yeah, they've absolutely. We are in a totally different nation right now than we were on Super Tuesday. And I think, I don't see how you can get behind someone who, and to me, now granted, you and I, it's very clear, and full disclosure, it's very clear where you and I stand on the candidate question. I mean, there's no question about that. But it seems to me that, it was in really stark relief for anyone who was watching last night that we're talking about someone who feels that they need to govern on behalf of the people, which would be Bernie, and someone who feels that they need to govern on behalf of the large corporations, which would be Biden. Take out the rest of the stuff surrounding it, and I felt that became clear. And in terms of a populist question and how do we manage and deal with actual people in this crisis, it seemed like, and this is an analogy that we spoke about before we went live, like Biden is in a car following Bernie while complaining. Actually, what I say, we can say this. He's like he's in a car following Bernie while bitching about having to be on a public road to begin with.
Yeah.
That's the way that it very much seemed to me. And he is, take questions of mental cognition out of it, which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment, but he is absolutely delusional if he thinks that a bank bailout will trickle down.
Yeah.
Absolutely delusional.
Not right now. No. If this wasn't caused by an external event, he would have cover to make that argument, right? I'm not saying it would be the correct argument, but he'd have cover to do that. He doesn't have cover to make these arguments right now. And we all know that the mainstream media is not going to push him on these things, but I honestly believe, and this is why Bernie should not drop out and should stay until the convention. We can talk more about it later, but I think that there are certain people in the media, in the establishment Democrats, in the power structure, who recognize the seriousness of the situation that we're all in right now. And I don't know if they necessarily watched last night's debate and went, "Oh, Bernie's the guy. He's the guy." But I think that a lot of them watched that and went, "Okay, wait a minute. Are we really making the right call here?" And they might not say it, but I think as this progresses, the case is going to become more and more, not only clear, but also more necessary for us to make. We have to be bold on this now.
Yeah, I mean, now, in what God, wow, I'm like self-editing here, and I don't mean to. I'm just trying to be coherent, because what you said, had like 4 ideas go in my head at the same time, and one of them is I think Biden even said in the debate, now we need to be bold, and then
right now
started talking about how we need to not be bold, and that made no sense to me. I mean, Biden is so woefully out of touch. I mean, doesn't he even seem to understand how this whole thing is a domino effect, and how it impacts absolutely everything else, and the same views and methodology. I mean, let's be honest. I'm doing, I'm not trying to do a commercial here, y'all. But if it works as a commercial, I'm okay with that. On my other site, I mean, this is a labor of love to me. But on Inkstand channel, where that's my author YouTube IP. I decided to change up my whole programming lineup, and I'm like running behind the curve right now, because I thought about it and went over and over and over, and I decided, in terms of talking about 20th century books, we really ought to talk about The Stand right now by Stephen King. And for a while I was like, is it too soon? Is it too soon to do that? I don't want to be like freaking people out, but by the same token, what it does illustrate for us, the book, not my chat on the book, which I hope is also illustrative, but what the book tells us is we have known that something like this, in obviously it's hyperbole in a fictional setting, The severity is much more severe in a personal setting. But we've known since before the 1970s. But here is a book, a very popular book from 1978, which illustrates how we are completely and woefully unprepared in this country to deal with the pandemic. Now we know that the pandemic we're dealing with right now is equally dangerous to some populations, to some demographics in our country, but it's not across the board. At least right now, it's not across the board as devastating as something as hyperbolic like a science fiction horror novel. But it's not that Stephen King is a prophet. It's not that he's prophetic. We have known that we are woefully unprepared for something like this.
Yeah. It's interesting because before all of this happened, I was interested in hearing and reading about the rationing that went on during World War II. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that struck me about listening to people who were alive at that time talk about it was nobody seemed to question how necessary it was.
Right.
Everybody just kind of had this. So I recognize, the difference, I think, in certain attitudes. But it seemed like nobody was like, what are we doing this for? Everybody had this sense of duty about it. And I'm sure there were people who were like, whatever. You're also talking about a war, not a disease.
Right.
And I think we'll start to see that again. I think that people will, for the most part, band together and do the right thing through all of this. So we have been through disasters before, and we have proved overall that we are capable of working together and having this mutual dignity and respect. And it's not alarmist for us to talk about the potential impacts that this could have, because we know what it's not going to be good. This is not going to be good a good couple of years coming up. And but the difference between apocalypse and a bad couple of years is proaction on these issues, these policies. If we don't, and that's the case that every progressive right now needs to be making. Every Democrat needs to be making. How is it that Mitt Romney is going to propose BI, which $1,000 isn't enough? Anyway,
wait, I'm sorry. I missed that entirely. Was I sleeping?
You hadn't heard about this?
No, was I sleeping when that happened?
This happened today.
All right, I'm going to put you on screen full, man. You tell us about this, because I missed this entirely. Go ahead.
Okay. So today, I think there was about 4 Republican lawmakers, the first of which I think was Mitt Romney, who said we need to put cash in people's hands. Now, Mitt Romney only proposed $1,000 one time. That's it. Just a one-time $1,000 stimulus, which it's better than nothing, but it isn't what people are going to need. And some Republican lawmakers proposed even more than $1,000. And it makes no sense to me that the Democrats wouldn't even make it a key issue before they passed that House bill last night, or whenever it was, Saturday. And it's giving these Republican senators the opportunity to say, oh, their bill doesn't go far enough. We're going to give you this and this and that. Why would they even give them that opportunity? So, Democrats need to say these policies are non-negotiable to Donald Trump. They need to say that to him, and they need to say that to Joe Biden. To anybody in government right now. These are non-negotiable. In as loud a voice as they can.
Just getting back to your original point, and thank you for letting us know that. I did not know. I was sleeping the day away and didn't know that had happened. But you're absolutely right. I mean, how is it that Mitt Romney's the one proposing UBI? Well, I mean, in all fairness, let's be honest. Tulsi had already been advocating for UBI in this crisis.
Oh yeah, and it's not adequate on its own,
right,
to solve the problem. So I think that's important to say. But you're right.
You know,
Tulsi and Andrew.
yeah.
They've been
Well, Andrew Yang,
knocking on this door.
had been advocating for UBI. That was the cornerstone of his campaign. But just in terms of in dealing with the crisis, Tulsi's been out there talking about UBI since the crisis became a crisis.
Yeah.
And I'm in agreement in the sense that it's not enough, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, I didn't feel when Yang was a candidate, I didn't feel that the cornerstone of the policy of UBI was enough.
No.
Or the UBI in itself was not a bad idea, but that $1,000 a month is enough. That's what I had in grad school to be a part-time instructor, and it just wasn't enough. I don't even want to say how long ago I was in grad school, but it wasn't enough even then to support a person, a student, much less a family. Yeah. But it's something. It's something more. It's an attempt to solve the problem. So yeah, I mean, I like also. It doesn't matter if I like it or not. I agree with and respect what you said about, you know, yeah, we need to. It's not an apocalyptic thing. It's going to be a bad couple years though. But who do you want? Yeah. It comes down to, again, who do you want in charge for those bad couple of years? Do you want someone who is singularly focused, single-minded on the people and helping the people get through the crisis, and realizes that our people, and this is a common theme, man, and this is going to lead us a little bit over to another question that I have for you about something.
Well, let me just say, before we move on, in a normal time, we've all heard this argument. Well, let's just get our guy in there, and then we can push for those revolutionary policies once we get them in there. We all know how that goes. It goes the same way every time. We get them in there. We go, okay, we'll get your guy in there, but you give us some policies, okay? And they go, okay. We get the guy in there, never get the policies. Right now, I personally don't have patience for that argument at all. If somebody tells me now is not the time to talk about Medicare for all I can think of is now is the perfect time to talk about Medicare for all. If you're not talking about Medicare for all, you're not taking this situation seriously.
Yeah, I mean, if now is the exact time, and I remember when this crisis happened, because I mean, you've known me a while. My mind is always going to some kind of strategy with regard to a progressive agenda, and I felt a little guilty. I may even have mentioned it on our last broadcast. I felt a little guilty because I'm like going, oh my God, this is awful, but it's the perfect illustration of why we need Medicare for all. We can ride this into the nomination, and you know, I know that's a mercenary way to think, and please, all, I'm not an uncompassionate person, but you know, what they're really good at, and what Biden did last night, and it goes right to the heart, I think, of what you were saying is, you know, once we get our guy in, then you can have policy. We just need to get our guy in, and it's never what they say it is, and in fact, this time, you know, they're like Bernie. You know, Bernie can, you know, he never conceded the election, but and for that I will always be proud to have served as a delegate for him. But the fact is, get behind Hillary, get Hillary in, and then, you know, we'll put some of your policies forward. Yeah. Now, Hillary didn't get in, and there's no way to know what, if any, of those policies that she agreed to would have actually been put forward if she had. But even the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, not the Democratic National Convention, even the DNC, they supposedly accommodated the progressives by things like limiting superdelegates to the second ballot. Although we know that you know, that accommodation was really hard fought. And we know that as soon as we got that, if you say we got that, as soon as that accommodation went through, I'm sure they started plotting how to get around it, which we've seen during this primary.
That's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem, is the negotiations never go, if we ever have negotiations, if they wanted to compromise with us, the Democratic Party establishment, they would, as the establishment, say, okay, look, no more superdelegates, period, ever. We will give you that, because we agree that no matter who it's in favor of or against, it's just not something we should have as part of our system. And then we would be having a completely different conversation. We would say, oh, wow, they're willing to make that big of a concession. That's something. But like you said, in their negotiations to pass that, they were explicitly stating, but we still want mechanisms to be able to use them if we so choose or so need to. And they have been using the superdelegates as, at least while Bernie was the front runner, they used superdelegates as a cudgel. Mm-hmm. They said, oh, you're ahead, huh? Well, can't wait till we whip them superdelegates out.
Right.
So that's the image that they're projecting to us is they don't want to compromise. They don't want unity. They want obedience. And if you are not willing to provide that at 100%, they have no use for you.
You're absolutely right. And you said it in a way that I've been trying to figure out how to say it. So I appreciate that on another level. I've been saying, their idea of unity is capitulation. But I think it's more. It's perhaps more apt to say that it's obedience. Because
I know somebody who went through this exact thing. They were a party official for many years, not high up or anything like that, just on a somewhat local level. And we're talking about as establishment as it gets, not as establishment as it gets, but somebody who capitulates to the establishment. We all know those types who are the up and comers in the party who they're willing to do whatever it takes to get in their favor, the establishment's favor. We know people like that, and even regular politicians. I think a lot of them go into politics with good intentions, and they want to make good changes, but they also feel like they need to capitulate to get more favor so that they can do the things they want to do, play the game. And this is something people tell me all the time. You got to play the game. Well, I know somebody who played the game for years and years and years, would do anything the party asked them to do, and when they finally had a substantive disagreement with the party, and it wasn't even on a policy issue, it was on, something minor, the party was like, okay, you're done. We don't want anything to do with you. Persona non grata. And that happens on the big level, too, with politicians. I think with Elizabeth Warren, some people have put her in that position where they're like, I'm done with you. You didn't capitulate as we needed you to. You're done. And so these people betray their own progressive values to no real reward. Number one, they feel terrible about that. And number two, they don't get that holy grail that they thought they'd get by capitulating all that time.
Yeah.
So that's my frustration with it.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about your experience specifically with that in just a moment. I want to wrap up the debate here. On a couple of points that you made, which I feel I always learn when I talk with you. So I'm so glad that you are willing to come on this evening. This idea, war not disease. If it was a war, would it be different? I think that people should keep that in mind, because in a sense, we kind of are in a war with an invisible adversary, but because the adversary absolutely doesn't care how we feel about it, we can't be on our nationalistic high horse of saying, oh, well, we have the moral high ground. You can't have the moral high ground against a virus. And so it really doesn't matter. What matters is what we do. And that question in stark relief is, are you in support of wanting someone to get us through these next couple of years who cares about you or who cares about corporate America as a primary? I mean, I'm not saying Joe Biden doesn't care about you. I'm just saying his first priority, his mind in terms of saving our people is saving the corporate structures. Whereas Bernie's is actually making sure that the people can get through this.
Yeah.
And I think Bernie's is a little bit a lot wiser. But I think there's greater truth to the fact that if there are no people, there's no one to keep those corporations in business. So I mean, he really, I can't believe that. So once this idea of what I was saying before is they accommodate or they capitulate with the superdelegates on the second ballot, and then they immediately start trying to plot how they're going to still maintain their power. The fact is, there is no respect, and it goes back to what Crystal Ball was saying, and again we talked in the last broadcast that we did from Progressive Voice. It's that idea of, and it's a skewed perspective. It's that perspective that they don't realize that the world has changed. They don't realize that corporate media is losing more and more of its power and more of its credibility, and the two things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And its credibility is flagging a lot more than its power, and that's going to catch up as the Generation Xers become the oldest generation, and the millennials become, the generational sandwich of where Gen X is now. And the fact is, you cannot win by pandering to a demographic that is outnumbered, and you do not have power if you can't reach the generation that is not voting for you. I mean, our power is our vote. And the fact is, as long as you're telling us that you don't care about our votes and our votes don't matter, that is not a good argument for why we should vote for you. Yeah. Your only argument is the demonization of the other guy. And the demonization of the other guy in this case is Trump. That fear tactic, quite frankly, pretty much worked in 2016. But we've been living under this Trump presidency, which I think now, again, provides a unique opportunity for a candidate to take him down, because his response to this crisis has been abysmal, and everybody knows it. Even media on the right can't help but critique his performance on this.
Right.
And so if we had a good candidate, if we had a strong candidate, we wouldn't have to pander to the myth of the never Trump Republicans. And it's very sad, because you sat there and I sat there during the great 5-day indoctrination of the Democratic National Committee at the convention. And we sat there for 5 days having them try and indoctrinate us while half drunk and sleep deprived, to try and get us using those interrogation tactics to try and get us to get behind Hillary. And ultimately, just because many of us voted for her doesn't mean that we supported her or we were behind her. A vote against someone is not a vote for the other person ideologically. Yeah. But you and I talked about that, and I remember, as promised, in terms of our preview blurb here. So one night, and it might very well have been the night of the roll call, I don't recall. We were at a reception, and this reception was, we knew that it was Harry Reid who was throwing the reception. It was Nevada, Colorado, and another state, Washington maybe, who our delegations were at this reception. And there was very little food and a whole lot of alcohol. And 4 years younger me and a 4 years younger Gabriel were sitting at a table in a corner trying to drown our sorrows in whatever was free at the open bar or low cost at the open bar. So we were drinking cheap something. And we were talking about where we go from here. Where do we go from here? And it's interesting because we had two sort of different responses to where we go from here. Not at that moment, but in practice. My where do we go from here is when we got back working with a group of other people. I was one of many who came together to form the Nevada Progressive Coalition to try and create an umbrella organization for progressives to be able to work together and not trip over each other and not have the kind of power struggles between different progressive organizations, so that we might be able to get stuff done. And as many of you know, we had our own trials and tribulations, but it still exists. And Gabriel, on the other hand, took the other runner route, and he decided to run for office. And one of the things that we talked about were at that night was as true today as it was then. And this election is not over by a long shot, and I don't think the primary is over by a long shot. But one of the things we discussed at that point was we need to empower people. And I said to you, feeling very old and very wise and very drunk, we need to make sure people feel that their voice matters. And we, at the time, I kind of illustrated it in our conversation with regard to ballot measures. And the idea that even if it's just a ballot measure, what is important to you? And then work the phones and knock on doors and get people involved. And even if you don't win, people seeing that thing that they fought for, that ballot measure on the ballot so that people could vote for it, even if they didn't win, the very idea that it came from nothing and became something that people could vote on was an empowering factor and might keep people engaged. And that was the discussion that we had at that point. And not to relitigate that discussion, but I would love to hear. I know that you're kind of going in that Bernie model, my friend. You're fighting the good fight, and even if you kind of get knocked down, you come back up and you say, okay, well, I'm going to keep fighting that fight. I know you've run for a couple of different things now. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I in 2018, the election of 2018, but this is early 2017. After the DNC, I tried to figure out what are we going to do, just like you said in the conversation. So I thought, well, I'm going to run for Congress, and because if Bernie can't be president, we need 1,000 more Bernies to be around the country and start running for office and start fighting for these progressive policies. And of course, I was a 25-year-old kid, and I don't know anything about running for Congress. And a lot of people were like, "What are you doing? You don't have any experience." All the things that they tell you to discourage you. But I think this is one thing that was really funny to me about it, is that I knew that I didn't have the experience. I knew I didn't have the money. I knew I didn't have the clout or the connections, any of that stuff. I wanted to find out from a fresh perspective, what is it like to run for office? And so I ran for Congress for a little bit. Another progressive jumped into that race, and he had a lot more money than I did. So I thought there's no reason for two of us to be here with the same policies running against this establishment candidate. So I jumped out of that race, and a few folks asked me to run for Secretary of State. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because there's not really there's not a wide range of progressive policies you can really fight for as a Secretary of State candidate. It's pretty straightforward what the job is. But nevertheless, I wanted to represent that constituency in some way. There weren't a lot of Bernie-crats running for office in Colorado. And the thing that really struck me while running for Secretary of State, because I was running for Congress for a pretty short amount of time, ran for Secretary longer, is people talk about money constantly. They talk about how much money have you raised, that's the first thing that comes out a lot of longtime Democrats' mouths. And this whole time I'm talking to them and I go, well, the Republican in office right now raised $300,000 last time. The Democrat raised $800,000. So why isn't there a Democrat sitting in office if money is so important? And when I asked these people that question, their brains would break. They would just go, well, we got to raise a lot of money. They would just act like I didn't say what I just said.
Well, yeah.
And I mean, when you
talk to a lot of people who have been in the party establishment for a long time, and even in our neck of the woods, we had that conflict between, okay, I've been in Nevada politics for 30 years. And this is politics 101, and you'd be like, okay, you need to throw politics 101 out the window, because that playbook and that that curriculum is gone. It no longer applies, particularly when you're trying to reach progressives. But, just on what you were saying, I've seen the look in their eyes when their brain breaks.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to put it.
And obviously it's important to have some money so you can get some materials and so you can hire a staff and all that, But it's like you said, you got to throw one-on-one out the book. Sometimes I'll get into an argument with one of those consultant types and they'll go, well, my political science degree says blah, blah, blah. And I love that one because I go, well, who's teaching it?
Exactly. Science class as taught by James Carville.
Yeah. There's some great political science professors out there. We know that's the truth. But those are people who teach their students to question the official narrative that they're supposed to be teaching in their college.
Yeah.
Whereas, the hacks, they just try to instill that not common knowledge, but, that institutional knowledge that sometimes it's helpful. Not every time. And I've talked to people about running for office, and they say, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. I didn't want to listen to any of that when I was running for secretary because I just wanted to see it from my own perspective. Helpful or unhelpful, didn't really matter to me. I was like, stay out of it. I'm going to try to figure this out. And of course I didn't win. Of course I didn't even come close to winning. I dropped out of the race because I didn't want to embarrass myself. But I learned a lot, which is really what the goal was. And that's kind of the way my brain works. I kid you not, when I showed up at Precinct Caucus in 2016, I didn't know what a delegate was. They said, we got these slots for delegate to the next assembly. And I thought, well, I don't know what that is. I want to find out. That's really what started this whole thing for me, was just curiosity to find out more about the process and how it works. And it's led me to some weird places.
So what is it that you're doing right now?
So I am running for office again, but this time on a much more manageable level. I'm running for state representative in my Colorado District 22. So instead of running a statewide race, I'm just running a small local race. But even that has been, we don't really know exactly how that's going to go either, because our assembly was supposed to be on Saturday, and because of this virus, we've canceled that, and now they want to conduct the vote through mail. Not electronically, not virtually. They're going to do it through the mail. I don't really know how that's going to work out.
Wow.
But I'm hoping for the best.
Sure. I want to jump on something that you said, a couple of things that you said earlier. I've started taking notes while I do this so that I can remember things. One of the things that you mentioned, and there are 2 points that I certainly want to get to. I mean, again, this is a new experience to all of us. We're in our second hour right now. And you and I, you mentioned that you got time, I got time. We're kind of in a quarantine, so
we all got time.
We all got time. If YouTube does cut this live stream off at the 2-hour mark, if we choose to, we can always start it right back up again after a pee break. But so the first thing that I want to ask you is, you mentioned something that's come up recently. What is a Bernie-crat? And because you said there weren't a lot of Bernie-crats running, and I'm trying to remember who brought this up. Somebody brought this up. Somebody asked me recently, I think it was, am I offended by being called a Bernie-crat? Would I be offended by being called a Bernie-crat? And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Are you trying to offend me? I mean, I don't know. I look at it as, I've considered myself, I've been a Democrat my entire life. I've been a Democrat my entire voting life. I consider a Democrat to be a Bernie-crat, to be a Democrat who believes in the policies brought forward by Bernie Sanders. as opposed to the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. And I know we're not about identity politics, and that's the only reason why the term Bernie-crat would be a little unctuous to me, is that, to say that implies that the only person who believes in those things is this one person. And Bernie is not an ideologue, and neither are we. What does that mean to you?
Well, so it gets into that conversation about labels, right? And it's a fun conversation to have, because I can just as strongly argue in favor of using labels as I can argue against using labels. It just depends on what the label is and what it's being used for. Well, Bernie-crat to me if you just expand it outwards, right? Let's just say you're explaining the political party system to somebody who has never heard about it before. And you just say, okay, if you are in a perfect world, right? We're talking about an ideal situation. You say, okay, person who doesn't know how parties work, the Republican means that you believe in this, 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 and this. Democrat means you believe in this, 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 and this. Wouldn't it be crazy if we heard people talking like that? But,
but we do, though, Gabriel. We do hear people talk about it like that. And the world does not exist in those black and white terms. This isn't a Tolkien novel.
Right. But it still is that's how the system is formed. You have Democrat, you got Republican. Of course, we all know there are other parties, and I want them to do well and all that stuff, but I'm a Democrat. And I want the Democrats who are fighting for single payer. I want the Democrats who are fighting against fracking. I want the Democrats who are fighting for humane and immigration systems. Go down the list. I want those Democrats to know that I'm one of them. And I want those Democrats to join in with me to pass those policies. So Bernie-crat, it's just, I use a million different words. Burners, Bernie-crats, progressives, Democratic Socialists. We have a million different labels. But, it's like centrist, right? They've caught on to the fact that we use that as somewhat of a pejorative. But the reality is it's only a pejorative because of the results that being a centrist has yielded.
Good point.
It's like being establishment isn't inherently an insult. It's only an insult because of what they're doing. And the whole point of what I think we need to do, I left the party in 2016. I came back to the party and I figured, okay, let's try to take this thing over from within. And Bernie-crat is that instant, okay, I know I can trust that person to help me if we go in this inter-party fight. Mm-hmm. I know they've got my back. That's kind of the way I look at it. But taking over the party is something that I fought with people about ever since 2016. We fought about it while we were there.
Right.
Is it possible? Can you reform the Democratic Party? Is it dead? You hear these questions all the time. To me, it's just as simple as I don't hate the Democratic Party. I don't want the Democratic Party to die. I don't hate Democrats. I want Democrats to be Democrats.
Yes.
I want them to fight for workers. I want them to fight for people of color. I want them to fight for all these things that they say they fight for.
Well, yeah, I think it was Nina. I think Nina puts it best when she says, what we're fighting for in the political revolution, and I think this was on our revolution call or something like that, is a party worthy of its promise. I just want...
It's the best way to say it.
Yeah, I don't want the Democratic Party to fail. Those of us who have been Democrats, who have seen the Democratic Party as the party that speaks to our values, want it to be the party that it tells us it is. Yeah. I think that's really what it comes down to. It's like I've said many times, if you look at the platform, and I said this a couple days ago, if you look at the platform, I am a Democrat. So who are these other people with a D in front of their name who don't stand for the things that I stand for? Because according to this party platform, the Bernie-crats, you, me, people who believe in social justice, people who believe in Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, environmental justice, social justice, economic justice. Those are all staples of the Democratic Party platform. So my question is, if those are the things that I believe in as a Bernie-crat, if those are the reasons I'm a member of the Democratic Party, then my question is, who are all these other people claiming that I'm not a Democrat when they're not the ones who follow the Democratic Party platform? So if I'm a Democrat, who the hell are you? And if I'm not a Democrat, then what the hell is a Democrat? Because it's certainly not what the party says it is.
Yeah, look, we all know politics exists on a spectrum.
Sure.
We all know that you can be, I mean, you hear the term all the time, conservative Democrat. They never, when you hear that demographic brought up on the media, right, they're never brought up as, oh, those conservative Democrats. Oh, no, it's, well, we got conservative Democrats. We've got some moderate Democrats. Then we have those leftist Democrats. That's the way they talk about it. And, you know, they say that we have this big tent party. Well, folks, I hate to break it to you. If you're a conservative Democrat, there's a place for you. It's called the Republican Party. I'm sorry, but that's the way I look at it.
Sure. And I think you're right. I mean, aside from the fact that the big tent is far too often a circus tent, you know, one of the things that you're absolutely right. If your values are more in line with the values of a quote unquote moderate Republican, but then again, I mean, I know that it sounds naive, and I want to make it clear that I am not naive. I'm just speaking in very specific terms as opposed to the vagaries and generalities that we usually use in politics. But the fact is, there's no place for those people in the Republican Party either, not according to the Republican Party platform, which is a certifiable nightmare.
Right.
You know, and so I know that there's gray area. It's all about nuance, yes. But I'm just saying, you know, I want to know at what point did either the party leave me behind or did I leave the party behind? But they don't seem to be in the same place, and there'll be an opportunity, you know, moving forward as we see what happens with the with this primary. Yeah. There will certainly be an opportunity to litigate where we go, depending on where we go. Maybe the Democratic Party does what it says it's going to do and embraces the candidate that speaks to its stated principles. And if that's the case, we're going to have a President Bernie Sanders. But if it does not, if it chooses to run counter to its stated mission and its stated identity, then there may have to be a discussion about, okay, how about you? It's okay. We need to reshuffle the board here. So how about you actually create a platform that speaks to what you are actually going to do and what you actually believe.
Right.
And then if we, as progressives, agree with being partners with you in that fight, then we'll continue to be Democrats. If not, we need to find a way to get to a party that does speak to our values. But as long as we have a party that speaks to our values and acts according to some other mode, that's why we have a schism within the Democratic Party. Yeah. One of the things
when we were
go ahead. No, man, go ahead.
I was just going to say that hotel that we stayed at in Philadelphia.
Sure.
They gave us 3 drink tickets or something.
Yeah, something like
for
that.
our trip. Something like that.
Those
and
went
of course,
quick.
Hey, 25 years old. Come on now, I'm going to go get me a drink. So I go over to the bartender, get my whiskey Coke, and the guy looks at me. He's an older guy, and he looks at me, my Bernie badge, and he goes, "You know, I like Bernie, but I just I don't think that he could get what he wants done. You know, I like him a lot. You know, he wasn't being rude or anything like that. So I just said, okay, look at it this way: in a negotiation, a good negotiator always understands you start way more extreme than what you're willing to accept, because then you can work your way back from there. Bernie understands that. And that's the way I phrased it to him. And he was like, oh, and you put it that way. I mean, because that's the thing about centrists, right? I would have a lot more respect for their argument if they were actually saying, hey, we would like single payer too, but if we can't get that, we're going to fight tooth and nail for that public option. They don't say that. They say single payer, we're not even going to talk about that, but maybe public option. I don't know. We can talk about it.
Yeah,
that's their reaction.
And it's interesting because we were saying, and we may have said it together back in 2016. If you go in asking for half a loaf, all you're going to get is crumbs.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I've become a little bit more set in those policy issues, because in defending Medicare for all, one of the things that we've had to do a lot is illustrate how a single payer option only creates a bigger problem. But that's a Medicare for all. I'd love to have that with you, and dedicate a whole time to that discussion. The fact is, there's a reason why Medicare for all works economically, and single payer ultimately won't. Single payer works ultimately, and why a public option would probably just be a catastrophe. But that's a whole other issue.
Well,
I wanted to mention something that you said, which I think the Democratic Party as a whole really should be thanking Bernie on their knees, offering to peel him a grape or something. Because a perfect example is what you said is similar to what I said. I was very inspired by Obama in wanting to be of service in whatever way I uniquely could be of service. So I had started a nonprofit, and this is not a discussion about that, but I was pursuing, the change that I wished to see through a very specific sort of effort. And it wasn't until Bernie, but I wasn't involved politically at all. And it wasn't until Bernie that I doubled down and basically did a graduate level crash course in American political science. Because if you recall, I am an extremist. It's like, oh, I don't know about this, so I'm going to jump down the rabbit hole and dig into it for a week.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
I know you are. And so you were talking about the not really knowing about politics. So until Bernie came along, and I didn't really get involved. I knocked on some doors and canvassed for Gore in Florida, of all places, back in the day. But when that ended, like so many, I'll use the term liberal because we didn't really use progressive back then. So many liberal Gen Xers, when we got served our walking papers by the Supreme Court in them appointing Bush to the White House after that election, a lot of us kind of distanced from the political scene. And so it was Bernie that really got me involved, not Bernie personally, but his campaign, that really got me to say I need to be involved in the political life of my community or my country. And there are so many people like you, like me, other people that we both know and that we know individually, who that is kind of a common story. Many of our leaders, many of our strongest leaders would not exist if there had been no Bernie Sanders presidency or presidential run in 2016. And I think the Democratic Party, if they could get away from behind their own ego and power grab, if they could actually see the truth, which is that enriches the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party experience, but they are so dead set against it. Now, you've run for actual office. I have not done so. I ran for one position in the Democratic Party in 2016 because there was such animosity in Nevada between the establishment or corporate wing of the Democratic Party and the progressives. And we all know that the Nevada State Democratic Party 2016 state convention was in many ways the shot heard around the world with regard to the political revolution. And having lived through that experience and having negotiated with the NV Dems to try and get parity between progressives and establishment Democrats, something which we seem to be making progress on, and then for various reasons, now that seems to be less and less. But I agreed to run for a spot on our dispute resolutions committee because I figured in our Democratic Party here, because I felt that we needed a progressive. We had a progressive voice on that who took very ill and ultimately succumbed to her illness. And I felt she had talked to me before she passed, and she felt and I felt that it was very important that there be a progressive member, a progressive voice on that dispute resolutions committee. And so I agreed to do it. And I won over a lot of people who talked with me later, about, the ideas that I expressed. But there was one lady who was dead set against a progressive having any say in anything. And she rallied her people around her. And just that one powerful person who goes to all of the Democratic meetings and all the Democratic clubs and caucuses and makes her presence known. She single-handedly wielded the power to nuke that entire idea of unity. The idea that if we're going to have a unified party, when we mitigate disputes, we have to have people on both sides of the discussion to really find a middle line. And I see that happening all over the place. Their establishment, the party establishment, is so dead set on maintaining a power structure that their first choice is they go to a nuclear option. But they don't realize that when you go to the nuclear option, eventually the only thing that's going to be left are cockroaches.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's so on the state level, I've managed to get on various committees in the Democratic Party through the time that I've been involved in the Democratic Party. And really and of course it's different everywhere, Nevada, I'm sure Chicago is a whole other beast,
right.
Wherever it's, but it hasn't been hard for me to walk into a meeting and just get that position on the committee. And the thing that I think every time I'm there is, man, I really wish I had 10 people who are just like me sitting right next to me, because it's like you said, 10 people in that meeting with you could change the dynamic of that meeting.
Yeah.
The problem is a lot of people like me and you took the other route and went, I'm not messing around with this Democratic Party. I don't trust them. I don't want anything to do with them. And you can't blame them for feeling that way. I mean, I felt that way at a certain point. But it's and of course, they're saying, well, we have this duopoly we have to fight. No, all those things. I agree with all those things. But sometimes just having those people, that energy, that ability to say, I don't care what you're telling me to do. I don't care that you're telling me to sit down and shut up. I'm going to challenge you anyway. That energy, it really does. And it's not even always challenging them, right? It's not always just walking into a meeting and going, what are you going to screw us over on today?
It feels like that sometimes, though, doesn't it?
Sometimes it does. But sometimes it's also just as simple as, okay, they want this stupid little petty change to make themselves feel important, but it's not really that big of a deal. I'm going to let them have this one. Then, when they're actually doing something, I'll give you an example, so I'm not speaking vague terms, okay? And this is a previous county chair. But my county chair, in 2018, I was part of the rules committee. And, I'm sorry, the resolutions committee. And I'm on the
so that
rules
same
now.
committee, the dispute resolutions committee.
Yeah. So, and in 2018, I was on the resolutions committee, and there was this resolution that came through our county that passed overwhelmingly, and it was supporting a statewide initiative which gave teachers better pay and limited some of the role of the DFERS, the charter school Democrats. And the resolution was, we support this initiative. As Jefferson County Democrats, we support this initiative. So the county, or our committee, did all the work we needed to do to count up the resolutions. We said, okay, these ones passed. They're going into the platform. And we're going to present this report to the whole county a week from now. Well, I get a call 2 days later. The committee votes on it. Everything's good to go. And it was the resolutions committee chair. She said, just to let you know, I resigned as the chair. I'm like, okay, what happened? I mean, we did our business. What's the deal with that? And she goes, the county chair was trying to call us into a meeting because she didn't like one of the platform planks. And I thought, well, she can't do that, right? And she goes, well, she's trying to anyway, so that's why I resigned. So of course, the county chair calls the meeting in order, even though she's not technically allowed to do that. And I thought, well, I better be there, because if I'm not there, she's going to do whatever with whoever shows up. And so I show up. The other committee members elect me the chair of the rules committee, or of the resolutions committee, for that session. And so I go, what's this about? Why are you calling us back into order? Why are you trying to get us to change what we already voted on? And she goes, the language is a little spotty on this one. It says, we support, as a county, a ballot initiative 69, but that's going to be a different initiative next year around. 69 is going to mean something else. And I go, okay. So we changed the language to the name of the initiative. We support the Great Schools Thriving Community Initiative of 2019. And there's nothing she could do. The county, or the committee, voted for it. Now it's in the platform. And that moment right there seems like a small victory when you fight over something as menial as a platform.
Sure.
But that reinforced my idea that, well, if there were 20 of me, or of us, 20 of us in this fight, this would be a no-brainer. It'd be easy.
Yeah,
we wouldn't have to deal with this sort of thing.
And that's one of the hardest things. Back in this conversation is great. By the way, folks, if whoever's watching, don't forget, you can put a comment in, and we'll see it, and we'll respond to your input so that you can be a part of this conversation. Also, don't forget, if you're watching and you haven't already done so, to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified of new content. There we go. I've done my public service for that.
I know this is bad. I keep touching my face.
No, now I wanted to touch my face. It's like when somebody yawns, right? It's
Ebola. Sorry.
Cough. So, but one of the things that this conversation, it helps to talk with people in other places. I mean, and sometimes, I've myself, I like to talk about. I like to talk, so that helps. But one of the topics that I mention a lot is that sometimes I get a little bit maligned because I talk with people nationally. I talk with a lot of people nationally. That's always been the case. I mean, in 2016, there was that a sort of insular group of people, because we were so much of our time was taken up with the fight for Bernie delegates. In 2016. I mean, I know almost all of my, and it was a hard, I just cut myself off. It was a hard fight because it kept getting harder. Every time we thought it would get easier, it got harder. And particularly in the wing of volunteerism with the campaign that I was in with media and communications, it was always another narrative that had to be countered, countered. And when we got to the delegate situation, and Bernie had no money. I mean, there was no money in that campaign. So when you and I had heard from the state director at that point, everybody waved to Joan. Hi, Joan. I don't think she's here, but if she is, if she happens to catch this. We needed to put together a way to communicate amongst delegates, and the campaign itself didn't have the headspace with all the other fights to be putting that together. So you were asked, I was asked, Skip was asked, a few people were asked to get together this delegate Slack, and doing that, we really got to see a lot of what was going on. I know, as the owner of the Slack,
not to start any crap, but Skip fought me that entire time. I just wanted to put that out there. Okay. Sorry, Skip. Love you. Sorry, Skip. I love you, but you fought me on that the whole time. I thought it was a good use of our time. He did not.
No, I understand. But a lot of it was, that was all encompassing once we got to that. And, for me anyway, I don't know if you know this. I think you knew this. Because my name was at the top owning the Slack, when Coalition of 57 yep. had decided that they were going to turn a lot of the convention into an activist mission, like, for example, the walkout, which was primarily organized, over that Slack room. I'm the one who got taken aside by the Secret Service and questioned. Because did you know that? Because at the end of the day,
I know some people did.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, whose name when they track it back with Slack into who owns the channel overall. And my name came up. I'm the one that got pulled out to get talked to by some very scary, well-dressed men about the activism and the movement and disrupting the convention. Wow. And I wasn't thrilled, but ultimately that scenario, that effort to communicate with people. Because the campaign couldn't. We got to see a lot of stuff that a lot of people didn't get to see. For example, the Rules Committee did a lot of their work via their Slack channel on the Slack network. And while I never participated in those things that I wasn't a part of, I was able to see all of the very, very hard work that people put forth on those committees that all operated with that as a communications platform. And I had caught a lot of flack for the fact that I was much more active nationally than I had been locally throughout the campaign. And I don't think I should have cut slack for it, but it was true, and it still is true, that I put a huge amount of time in trying to talk to people in different parts of the country, like yourself, where the fact is, it helps because the struggles that you were facing in terms of this, it's a very simple fix on that plank. You instead of dealing with the number of the ballot initiative, just refer to the name of the ballot initiative. But there are some in the party that any pretext that they can find,
of course,
to try and kill some kind of progressive idea or progressive influx, they do it. And we have had a good bit of success, at least at the county level. And by I say we, I mean the people who are putting forth that effort. I mean we as a movement. Excuse me. In terms of getting people seated on the Clark County Democratic Party Executive Committee, and in some cases, some positions on the state party executive committees. But it's always an incredibly, or it seems to me from what is relayed to me, a very harrowing process, a very, not just the process, but a very harrowing position to be in, because it's a constant fight. It's a constant fight to try and, even if you're trying to do something, and they all are trying to do something for the benefit of the party, but showing the party that, sometimes I feel that the Democratic Party, gosh, I'm going to get called anti-senior citizen now, but it's the best way that I can explain things. When you have little kids, and you are a parent, I'm not, I have dogs. Sometimes they're easier to communicate with. But
their toddlers never grow up.
Right. So with little kids, little itty bitties, and then in adolescence, you deal with people who are belligerent about doing things they're not necessarily thrilled about. And they'll come up with any excuse, little kids, because they just don't know any better. And then turn that pendulum all the way around to the other side. And you often have, and I'm not saying this about all seniors, I know some incredibly wonderful senior citizens and I know a lot of senior citizens who are Bernie supporters and who are flexible of mind. But the older we get, and sometimes the more experience we get, the less flexible we become ideologically and mentally. And then it becomes a struggle that little kids, they have no ways to be set in, so they fight everything tooth and nail. And then at the other side of the spectrum, a lot of our old folks fight everything tooth and nail because they have experience and become set in their ways and don't want to see change. And the older and longer they've been in the party, the more they hold on to ineffective policies and resist change because they are so convinced that they must be right or what they fought for did not have meaning. And we saw this in
that's exactly. Yeah.
And we see this in the Medicare for All discussion. I mean, I'm a part of a union, and my union did not do right by us for years with regard to health care. They're getting a little better. But many educators in Clark County and in Nevada as a whole, our credit, our livelihoods, our savings, our futures have been decimated by predatory health insurance that our union approved. Now, like I said, it's getting better now, but it's getting better after I had to go through a leave of absence and spinal surgery and all of the credit issues that go with that. And my union was not there for me, and my health insurance company was not there for me. So, and I know that we gave concessions in order to get the crappy ass coverage that we already had. But there are so many, that's the fight that's being used. Why does it somehow make sense to the corporate wing of the Democratic Party? Why does it somehow make sense that if you are a union member and you gave up concessions on this contract today, and you had to fight for those concessions, that somehow we all need to deal with that fight for your concessions in perpetuity as a nation, rather than the idea of releasing that fight so that you can fight for something else. I mean, if we didn't have to fight for health insurance, we could fight for better wages. We could fight for better conditions. We could fight for all those things. But it's that idea, we fought really hard for it, and now we got it, so we got to hold on to it tooth and nail, even if it's to our detriment.
Yeah.
And that is an outmoded and outdated way of thinking, which is all about the emotional equivalency of, if I fought really hard for this, I have to keep it at all costs, even if something better comes along. And I don't mean to be flippant in saying that is so similar to a dysfunctional relationship interpersonally, but it is. It is exactly like an interpersonal dysfunctional relationship. It's that idea, in a relationship, and yes, I am single, guys. Yes, ladies out there, all this, single. But aside from that, one of the reasons I'm going to be 47 years old in the next couple weeks here. One of the reasons I'm 47 years old and I'm still single is because I learned along the way that holding on to something that is dysfunctional, holding on to something that makes a negative impact on your life, simply because you don't want to feel like you're losing something that you fought for, is why we have such a terrible divorce rate, number one, why our relationships interpersonally tend to be so awful. I remember once staying in a relationship, and this is not about me, it is actually about the party, but I remember I once stayed in a relationship for a year longer than I should have because I was so upset about how I would feel, about how she would feel getting her stuff out of my closet. So for a year, because she was afraid of the same thing, we put up with this relationship that was making us both kind of miserable because we didn't want to do we were afraid of how we would feel doing the housekeeping of making a change. And I see that is a direct correlation with the Democratic Party. The housekeeping of making the change is adopting a Medicare for all policy.
Yeah.
But we'd rather stay miserable and feel that we were right in fighting for those benefits instead of making the change that's going to improve our lives.
Yeah. It kind of ties into the conversation I had with that ex-party official, where they look at it like, I've been taking their incremental change bullcrap for years and just accepting it and been, servicing it. And you come in and you think that you can get everything you want just because you want it. That's the way they look at us. That's really what it is. And for us, it's like the way I look at it as, it's like freshman hazing, right? You show up at your high school, you're a freshman, you heard people haze you, you're nervous about it, you're scared about it, and then sure enough, the senior shows up, it's time for your hazing, and they do it. And you're thinking to yourself, why is this system go on? You didn't like it when you were a freshman, did you? Well, in the mind of the senior, I had to go through it.
Right.
So you have to go through it.
Yeah.
And only when the person, one of those two people in that chain says, enough of this. We're going to break this chain now. Only when they decide, is it going to break?
Exactly.
And it's the same with the party.
And I think the answer to that question that we've all dealt with, which is, well, I've been here in the Democratic Party for 40 years or 30 years or whatever it is. Who are you to think that you're going to come in right now and create a change? And first of all, that is an attitude that is completely egocentric, first of all.
Of course.
And of course, they're going to call you egocentric for wanting to make a positive change for everyone just by having the audacity to think that your involvement might help make that change. Right. But the thing is, I think the answer to that question is, why do you think you're going to get this policy now and you're just getting here? I think the answer is because I'm still willing to fight for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what it comes down to is that's why progressives who are becoming activated think that change can happen, because they're willing to fight for it. And it is our own party so often that is trying to obstruct that change. So as we're closing out our second hour here, can you believe it? We're closing out our second hour here already. Again, anyone who's watching, whether you're watching live or you're watching in a feed that's after we go off the stream here, don't forget to, if you think our content is valuable to you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified anytime we produce new content and it comes up. And also don't forget, any of these live streams, if you're catching it live, you can always comment in real time, and we'll discuss your comments. And of course, if you comment after the fact, I'll get back with you and respond to that as best I can. So, coming to the end of this second hour, I have a question for you. We're going to get back to the initial thing here, the debate. What do you think it did? Do you think it did anything for Bernie's cause? Do you think it hurt Bernie's cause? Do you think it helped or hurt Biden's cause? And ultimately, what were some highlights? I know we're coming into to hour 3 here, and if you're able to hang with us, Gabriel, I really appreciate that. But I'm curious to know, because we really only talked about the first third of the debate.
Yeah.
So what do you think happened after that?
So in terms of the impact of the debate, one of the things that I tried to think about as I was watching it was, how is the person who doesn't normally watch these things, how is the person who doesn't really have a preference in any sort of way because they don't really know all that much about politics, they just, hey, they're quarantined, they decided to tune in, whatever, there's no sports on, whatever. I would try to think about what are they thinking about that debate? And the answer is I don't know. I have no idea. But I watched a lot of people talk about how they don't think it's really going to change the trajectory of the race. That's something I saw in pro-Bernie media, in anti-Bernie media, I saw that come up a few times. This isn't going to change the trajectory of the race. It might not, but it may define the race as the trajectory of the race radically alters in front of us. And, you know, I did wonder going into it, is Bernie basically, because the way they wanted to bill it was Bernie is just going to, as the debate continues, slowly gift his movement to Joe Biden. And by the end of the debate, he's going to go, Joe Biden, they're your children now. Take care of them. That's what they were trying to present this whole thing as going to be. Now, I wasn't sure what Bernie was going to do. Is he just going to kind of just go softball on him like he normally does? And then when he started hitting those punches, a lot of people, like I started with earlier, they're like, I want this to be a bloodbath. He's going to mop the floor with Joe Biden. Of course, we don't like to see that. But I think it was a disappointment for a lot of them because they had that built-up vision in their head of what it would finally look like for Spicy Bernie to sizzle all over Joe. But to me, I think he did exactly that. I think he challenged him on when he needed to. He wasn't, let me put it this way, he wasn't Elizabeth Warren versus Bloomberg aggressive, which I think some people wanted to see, but I think wouldn't have necessarily landed well in this circumstance. I don't think he could have completely eviscerated the guy. He especially couldn't bring up the fact that, you know, he's having all these gaffes. I think Bernie's making the right call by not bringing those to attention.
Yeah, I mean, I think he got. I do think we got salty Bernie a little bit. He did not let up when, you know, I was shocked, and you know, if you watch a lot of the independent media, and again, it was weird today because I'm not at work. I was asleep right before Rising premiered today, so I have no idea what Crystal Ball had to say today or Sagar. I was getting ready for this broadcast, so I did not catch what TYT said. I caught a little bit about what they were saying right after the debate, but the fact is, you know, I think he did go after him a lot more than we've seen him go after him before, and the fact that I think pointing out his lies, quote unquote. I mean, they were talking about how on TYT Joe Biden blatantly was lying about everything. You know, he was so blatantly lying about his record, blatantly lying about all of these issues. And I think he did go after him because he kept saying, and I think there was a little slight nod to the cognitive decline. Because he's like, Joe, did you remember that? Do you remember, Joe? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you say this on the floor of the House? And I think that was a strategy to try and illuminate some of this cognitive decline without going directly at the cognitive decline. Yeah. And go to the YouTube. Go to the YouTube.
Yeah, that was great. Let's look at the actual status of the race. And I'm going to try to be as objective and plain as I can be about the way I see it right now. Like I said, if we didn't have this virus happening, honestly, I would say it'd probably be over for Bernie at this point. But now, this I would say, regardless, crisis or not, he still needs to take it to the convention because he needs to be forceful about the arguments that we're trying to make. But because of this virus, and because Biden's only 150 delegates ahead,
right,
neither of them have half of the amount that they need to be the nominee.
Sure.
I mean, that's just math. There's no arguing against that. And they could say, well, the math doesn't look good in his favor. The polls are meaningless right now. They're meaningless. We don't know. I mean, we already know that there are primaries that are getting postponed. We already know, unfortunately, there's some happening tomorrow that are not. But we don't know how the vote is actually going to play out.
Right.
If we don't know. So I think I think there's a reason that Nancy Pelosi didn't say that Bernie should not jump out of the race. And this is the only reason I say that. Number one, she said it without being asked about it. She said, before you ask me, no, I don't think Bernie should jump out of the race. She started with that. So, and that, when I saw that story going around that she said that, I was like, whatever, she's just trying not to piss us off. But I thought it was interesting that she brought it up on her own.
Sure.
And it's not that I think that she is warming towards us, right? I think it's that on a certain level she understands that Bernie is still very much a contender in this.
Yeah.
And that there is a lot of track for Biden to crash off of.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely 100% accurate. I do think that some people are going to look at the stark difference, and I think the more that people pointed out on independent media also, the stark difference, not in terms of a judgment about, say, people, but saying, okay, I think in this debate, we saw very clearly what the core of the belief systems are. Bernie is a populist. His first question is, how do we help the American people in their daily lives? Biden, how do we save our economy? How do we save the corporate structure of our country in this crisis? That's where his mind goes to first. Bernie's mind goes first to the people. And without judgment, I say, whichever one speaks to you as a voter, we live in a democracy. Yeah. If you want a candidate that, hey, he's a decent guy, I think, at his heart, but he puts corporations and the economic capitalist structure and tries to prop that up in this crisis, and that's his first order of business, is we must defend Wall Street. We must defend our economy by taking care of our corporations. That is a view, and that is a philosophical and ideological standpoint. If you say first, we must take care of our people, and only through taking care of our people will that trickle up and take care of our corporations, that is an almost 180-degree antithetical view to the first one I laid out. Bernie is of that second view. Biden is of that first view, and whichever view you are should be the person that you vote for. I feel if laid out very clearly in those terms and taking the emotion and the emotional attachment to candidates out of it, it always comes down to vote your beliefs, vote your views, who speaks to your belief system and the country you want to see more. If that's Biden, by all means vote for Biden. If that's Bernie, by all means vote for Bernie.
I've started tweeting vote true no matter who.
That I'm gonna steal that. I'm going to steal
it. Make it a thing. Make it a movement. Because what you just said is exactly it. If somebody is voting for Joe Biden, like you said, because they believe in him, they're comforted by him, they don't like Bernie. Even that to me it's a crappy reason, but it's a valid reason. The point I've been trying to make to people only is this. If you are only voting for Biden because you think he can win in November, do not vote for Joe Biden to be the nominee. And that's basically the point I've been trying to tell people is here's the what we're looking at with Joe Biden. We're talking about, and this isn't me trying to make a laundry list of reasons I don't like Joe Biden. This is just objective fact. Burisma, the cognitive decline, the Social Security cuts, the trade deals, the weird videos of him getting boundary issues. We'll just say that's a nice way to say it, I guess. I don't know. And there's just a laundry list of things that are instantly taken off the table from Trump's arsenal if you nominate Bernie Sanders. You want to remove the risk that all of those things represent? What do they got against Bernie? He's a socialist. In the middle of a pandemic, I don't think people are going to care all that much. What else do they got? Oh, he said some nice things about Castro back in the 80s. You're gonna flip when you hear this. A recent poll came out of Florida. Of course, Joe Biden is polling better. But guess who's winning among the Cuban population?
Seriously?
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie's winning amongst the Cuban population. That's
it's only
awesome.
by 1% in the poll that they took, but it's only by 1%, but it's still 1% higher than Joe Biden.
So do you think we're going to have a surprise out of Florida?
Knocked my I got a little too talked with my hands too much.
I know I knocked my camera out. So
sorry, what was that?
No, I was so excited by what you were saying. I knocked my camera out for a second.
Oh yeah, so that's the case that I'm making. If even people who do want to vote for Joe Biden, like I said, I completely understand the reasoning for wanting to do so for the most part, and I'm not going to shame them. I don't vote or shame anybody. I don't shame you if you voted for Trump. I don't shame you if you voted for Clinton. I don't shame you if you voted for Stein, Vermin Supreme. I don't care who you are. Vote true no matter who. But
just so you know, while you were talking, and this is part of why I knocked my camera out, I put that graphic up on the screen for you. Hashtag vote true no matter who. Should be all lowercase, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm still getting used to the Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
So vote true no matter who. I said, you know, hashtag vote true no matter who, make it a thing.
Yeah. But, you know, and I was Bernie or bust in 2016.
I recall many a conversation about that.
So many harumps about that. But that was another one of those things where it's like, I walked into the 2016 primary with absolutely no hatred for Hillary Clinton. I didn't walk into it with a chip on my shoulder against her or her supporters. When I was getting engaged in the political process in 2016, this is really what started it all for me. This was October of 2015, 6 months before the first vote was cast. I go into this chat room where they have political conversations, and I just walked in and said, "Hey, I think I like this Bernie guy. Who are you guys supporting?" You know, my whole vibe was just like, "Hey, let's talk about it. Let's, you know," because I don't know that people are so charged about it. So immediately people posting, "Go F yourself," you know, go, you know, you're a vote for Bernie's a vote for Trump. In October of 2015, they're saying this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, I just wanted to know. But I brushed it off, you know. That was weird. But as the process continued, as you experienced, as a lot of us experienced, that never went away. That is what we were met with from the get-go.
We're still met with it.
It wasn't like, of course, I mean, I'm trying to be careful because I'm in a primary.
I understand.
I don't want to be denigrating.
Well, you'd have my vote if I was there, man, so you know that.
Well, I appreciate it. But part of the reason I'm in a primary is because I am a Bernie supporter. Because this is the first primary in this district since it was formed 12 years ago. The reason that I'm facing one is because I'm a Bernie supporter, because they don't want that type of person representing them, my primary opponent. I think it's safe to say that. And the thing about it is that I wanted to work with this person. I was like, let's come together. Let's win this district. Democrats have never won here before, but I think we can do it. That was my attitude. Just like that first time I was telling you about with the chats. Mm-hmm. I came into it with that vibe, and I wasn't met with F words or, you know, open hostility, but the establishment is smart because their hostility is measured. It's backhanded compliment. You know, it's those sorts of things, and then as soon as you're not in the room, they want to ram you out the door.
Yeah, for the Pete Buttigieg's of the world who need stage directions, it's like placating acceptance with eye roll.
Of course, yeah, and so that's the message that I want to get across to the Bernie bros and the Bernie, all the Bernie bros, men, women, everybody, is they are going to say whatever they want about us. They're going to say we're monsters. They're going to say we're demons. They're going to say whatever. Doesn't matter if you're on your best behavior. Now, of course, you don't want to be cruel. You don't want to be, mean-spirited for the sake of being mean-spirited. But we don't have to just take it. We can say, hey, what are you doing or what have you supported that makes our lives better? And if they can't point towards something, just like Joe Biden can't really point towards anything, then you go, well, here's what we've got. Until you come up with something, we're moving full steam ahead.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting. You said Bernie Bros. I don't know if you saw this, and this was not me. Yes, I am male. This is in no way. I know it could be taken as misogynistic, but it was created by a woman. So, and I think it was really funny when it came out. When the ladies stormed the stage, the ones protesting milk, at on Bernie's rally, and then shortly thereafter it came out that actually Bernie has more supporters who are women than actually he has supporters who are men. So this woman I know hashtagged Bernie bras.
Yeah. Bernie bras.
And I thought that
was
was
funny.
There's
a lot of fun hashtags out there.
Yeah, and I put it up on the screen, but I like yours better. The vote true no matter who. So y'all remember, vote true no matter who.
Yeah, no, and this is something I got into it with somebody who was just like, well, black people just don't seem to like Bernie, and I'm like, no. Older black people don't seem to like Bernie. And you know why older black people don't seem to like Bernie? Because older people in general
don't like Bernie.
Of every demographic don't like Bernie.
It's oh my gosh. I was watching this thing lately. I have a whole diatribe I'll skip and I'll spare you from about how comedy is being killed by and I'm a progressive by any measure, and sometimes the social justice warriors make me want to bang nails into the floor with my head too. But how comedy is being killed by this ultra woke mentality. But I was recently rewatching an old George Carlin sketch, and it really struck me exactly what you're saying, because he has this whole sketch where he's like, I have a friend who happens to be black, right? And he's got this whole bit about just be accepting. You don't need to go about happens to be this or happens to be that. But that's the first thing that came into my mind recently when the pundits were talking about Bernie doesn't have traction among black people. I'm like, no, among older black folks. And I'm like, no, Bernie doesn't have traction with older folks. Some of them happen to be black. Yeah. And they never ask the question, why? Why do older people gravitate towards anybody but Sanders, and why do young people gravitate towards only Bernie Sanders? What is the reason for that? And that is an excellent topic for another chat.
It is.
And if you are willing, man, I would love to have you on again and chat some more about that and some more about how your campaign is going. I really appreciate your taking the time, Gabriel. I've missed you.
Happy to do it.
And anytime, man. Let's do it again soon, okay?
I had fun. Thank you for having me.
All right, man. Thanks again. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the end, and I know I'm going to get better at all of this technology. So, again, thanks for joining us with Progressive Voice, a network designed to engage, educate, and empower your progressive voice. If you're watching this in the future, hit that like button, the thumbs up at the bottom of your screen, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bells so that you can be notified when we have new content. So until now, those of you who are self-quarantining, remember, you are not alone. We're here with you, and we'll be live streaming a lot during this time. And on top of that, be safe and be smart, and hope everyone is well. Thanks again.